Hey guys, Serial Writer here. I wanted to go ahead and give you a quick little tutorial on how to change the oil on your 2011 CBR250. I have a red and silver version sitting right here, and first thing we're going to do is go ahead and get that bike started up, let it run for a few minutes, warm that oil up on the inside, get everything all nice and loose. And while that's still warming up, we're going to go ahead and switch over here to the oil and filter I chose to use. Right here I have a Repsol Racing, which is a 10W30 oil, and for the filter I have a K&N 112, which if you have the 2011 model, that's the one you're going to want to buy. If you have a different model of bike or a different year, you may want to double check with K&N to make sure that you get the right one. Okay, so after you've let the bike warm up for a few minutes, we're going to cut that off and switch to the lower right side fairing, and we're going to pull this hex bolt out right here, and you're going to need to use an Allen key to do that. What I'm using here is actually just a screwdriver that has an Allen bit in it, so that'll allow me to take it off a little bit easier. And once we take that off, that's going to allow us to flex that lower right side fairing so we can get access to the oil filter cover. And then we're going to switch over to the screw that actually keeps the lower left fairing and the lower right fairing attached to each other. When we take this out, that's going to allow us to flex that lower right side fairing even more, which will give us easier access to getting to where that oil cover is. Make sure you set that aside so you don't lose it. And now we're going to switch over to draining the oil itself. You're going to want to make sure you use a socket wrench here because it'll be really difficult to get the bolt off if you're not. You're going to want to make sure you use a 12mm socket. If you use anything else, you risk stripping the bolt, making it either really hard to get off the next time, or maybe you just won't even get it off this time. I do recommend wearing gloves during this part. You will have warm oil coming out of the engine since we just did run the bike. And if you want, you can even use plastic gloves. That way it's not going to get through to your hands at all, and you can stay nice and clean. You do want to make sure you use a catch here because the oil is going to come out as soon as it breaks the seal, and it's going to fill up pretty quick, so make sure you don't dump this stuff on your driveway. It'll get really messy if you do. As you can see, the oil is coming out now. I'm going to set that bolt aside for later, and just to make sure we get everything out, we're going to go ahead and stand that bike up, let it drip out a little bit more. And one thing I like to do just to make sure I get it out of all the nooks and crannies is to go ahead and rock the bike back and forth to the left and right. Since we have a really light bike with the CBR250, it's pretty easy to do. May not be as easy with heavier bikes, but here it's pretty easy. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and take a look at the oil filter cover. So as you can see, I'm pulling that lower right side fairing back a little bit. You don't need to worry, it'll flex pretty well. And you see there's 4 bolts that are keeping that cover attached. Those are 7mm bolts. Again, you want to make sure you're using the right size socket. These are actually more fragile than the drain bolt, so you really want to be careful not to strip those or you will have to replace them. I'm not going to make you watch this whole thing at normal speed, because I am a little bit more careful with these. I do take my time to make sure I don't strip those, so I have sped this part up for you a little bit. One thing to keep in mind, you'll see it here in a second, is once you get the seal broken with the gasket for the oil filter cover, oil will also come out of here. So make sure you have your catch close by, because it's going to spew a little bit of oil out, so you want to make sure it's going to drip into a pan and not on your driveway or on you, or maybe there's a dog or a cat laying around with you while you're doing this stuff. Don't let it drip on them either. Wouldn't be a good idea. So I'm going to go ahead and let you watch this for a second while we take that off, and then we're going to get to the filter itself. Okay, now that we have that oil cover off, we're going to go ahead and take a look at what's on the inside. You have your old oil filter there. You can go ahead and set it aside. We're not going to need that anymore. Once you look inside the cover, you're going to notice that spring. You want to make sure you don't lose that part. It is essential. That's going to provide a spring force on the filter that's going to keep it pressed up against the gasket on the filter intake. So make sure you set that aside, or you keep that inside the cover. Either way, just don't lose that part, or you're going to have to replace it before you can ride. Next, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the oil filter basket, which is where the oil filter sits. You see there's going to still be a little bit of oil in there. You can wipe that off or not. Doesn't really matter. It's going to get new oil in there. Notice that intake I was mentioning, and if you see that black ring around the outside, that's going to be the oil filter gasket I mentioned earlier. So you should replace that every couple of oil changes. I don't do it on every change, but every now and then you're going to want to replace that part because it will get worn out. Next, we're going to go ahead and look at our new oil filter, which again is the K&N 112. You're going to go ahead and see that written right on there on the top. That's going to be written on the side with the gasket. And we're going to go ahead and place this inside the cover. So when you place it in the cover, again, if you notice that spring there, there's a specific orientation in which the filter will sit. You're going to want to make sure the side with the indentation on the filter sits against the spring, just like this. It's not going to fit the other way, and I'll even show you. So when you flip it upside down, you try and press the gasket against the spring, it's not going to fit. So you're going to want to make sure you go ahead and put it in there with this orientation. That is the only way that it should fit properly. And now that we have that ready to go, we're going to go ahead and put it back on the bike. So again, you're going to want to flex that lower right side fairing back out. And what I recommend here to make life a little bit easier is to go ahead and put your bolts in by hand. Now when you're first putting that cover on, you're going to have to apply a little bit of pressure. As you saw the bike move there for a second, you are going to have to apply just enough pressure to overcome the spring force that's resisting you moving that filter towards the bike. So that's going to apply the pressure to keep the gasket sealed. So the best thing to do here is to go ahead and press that up, take your bolts, put them in one by one with a little bit of hand turning. What that's going to do is allow you to go ahead and get a little bit of thread in there, and then you don't have to hold it anymore. Then you can go ahead and get your socket wrench like I'm doing here, tighten everything on down. Yet again, best thing to do, use the right socket. Don't use the wrong size, especially when you're tightening it, because you could very well strip them and ruin them. That would make it really hard to get off the next time. And when you're tightening everything back up, I recommend that you switch back and forth between the different bolts during the tightening process, as you can see I'm doing here. What that's going to do is allow them to tighten evenly and press down firmly on the gasket without having one side looser than the other. That'll make sure you have an even seal. And now we're going to go ahead and put back in the drain bolt. Pretty easy. You just want to make sure you put it back in the hole where it came out of. Go ahead and start tightening it up. Now you do want to make sure that you don't apply too much pressure here. I believe it's supposed to be somewhere around 8 pounds of pressure. So if you don't have a torque wrench when you're tightening it, just make sure you don't try and strong arm it in there. Yet again, you could strip the bolt, make it really hard to get out the next time, and you don't want to do that. That's just going to make life unnecessarily hard. Now that we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and put our new oil in. So to do that, go ahead and open up your bottle of oil, pull the nozzle out, turn her upside down, stick it in the hole, let her drain. Now to speed up the process, you may want to apply a little bit of pressure to the bottle. That way you'll get that oil to come out a little bit quicker. Otherwise it may take quite a long time. Now if you're doing what I'm doing and you're changing the oil filter, which you should do, it'll take about 1.6 liters. If you're not going to change the filter, which yet again you should be doing, it's only going to take about 1.5. And once you're done putting all the oil in the bike, you should still have a little bit left in your second bottle. Go ahead and pull that off and put your oil cap back on. And once we're done with that, the next thing to do is go ahead and start up the bike. Because what we want to do is go ahead and force that oil into the engine and the clutch basket and go ahead and lubricate the parts with the new oil. You do not want to let the engine just sit without running it, even though it has new oil sitting in it. That's going to do you no good. So go ahead and start up the bike, and you're going to want to let that run for a minute so you can go ahead and get all the parts inside lubricated. I would say run it for at least about 3 to 5 minutes, and once you're done with that, cut the bike off, stand it up. Then we're going to take a look at your oil level window. You're going to want to make sure that the oil level is somewhere around that upper mark. You don't want to be too far over at all, and you don't want to be really far under. Make sure it's close to the upper mark. Once we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and button up the right side fairing. Go ahead and take that Allen bolt you had earlier and set aside, put that back in, and tighten it down. Hit again. Don't tighten things down too hard, because if you strip them, it's just going to make the next job really difficult. So go ahead and tighten that down, but be careful not to over tighten it. After that, we're going to go ahead and put the screw back in that keeps the lower left side and right side fairings attached to each other. So as you can see here, I'm doing that by hand. You're going to want to take your left hand and hold the left side fairing onto the right side fairing, and use your right hand to go ahead and put it in and screw it down a little bit. Now, the reason why I do it by hand is because the left side actually has the threads and the right side does not. So if you hold it by hand, it makes it a little bit easier to get in there. Then you can take your screwdriver or T-handle in my case and tighten it down. And once that's all tightened up, the next thing to do, go ahead and clean up. What I'm using here is a spray-on polish cleaner. Now that works on plastic, chrome, just about anything. It's pretty cheap and it lasts for quite a while. That's why I use it. Now, as you can see here, I do have a little oil spot underneath the bike. That was from a little bit of leftover that was on the drain bolt that I hadn't cleaned yet, and I didn't leave my catch under there. If you're going to do the same thing, which isn't a problem, go ahead and clean it up with a little bit of kitty litter. I didn't show that here, but it's cheap and it works. It's going to pull up almost all of that oil, and whatever little bit is left is pretty easy to spray off. Remember to go ahead and wipe down the underside, which I didn't do before, which is why I had that oil spot. So now, as you can see, I'm wiping off the drain bolt and the crankcase breather tube and just that whole general area. I'm going to go ahead and clean off real quick. And we're going to do that for a second. And then after that, the last thing to do, get on that bike and go for a ride. This is Serial Rider. Thanks for checking out my oil change tutorial on a CBR 250. I'm going to go out now. Yeah, I'm squidding a little bit, but I'm only taking it around the neighborhood. See you later, guys.